This is last weekend at Sierre-Zinal. The greatest mountain runner of all time, not just now, but all time, Kilian, being pushed to the limit by Philemon Ombogo. Who is Philemon Ombogo? That's the question. 2 years ago, he wasn't in the sport. Last year, he won this race. Now, he's pushing the greatest of all time all the way to the finish line. This is Kilian's 10th victory, and Kilian will go into the lead in a second, but he's clearly being tested here, and had to run last weekend his fastest ever time on this course. So somebody who knows the course backwards, dominated the rest of the world for the last 2 decades, is being threatened by a guy who's been in the sport for less than 2 years. Now we see the cameraman go into his element. Wow. Look at that pace, like 18 to 20 kilometers an hour, and the cameraman is keeping up. That's, for me, MVP. But we're watching, maybe there's a little bit of downhill technique that we can see the difference between Kilian and Philemon there. So there's a little bit more training that needs to go into it, but Kilian is about to make his move. And maybe, if Kilian is smart, which I know he is, he's really smart, then perhaps he sets these things up. It's not the first time that it's come down to the wire. In 2022, it also came down to the wire, and Kilian took the victory there. And last year, Philemon won, and it was an all-Kenyan podium. And as it goes into the valley in a second, I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but as it goes into the valley, they both cut the corner there. Hey, referee. And you're allowed to do that in trail running. But Kilian looks like he's just pulling away from him now, and Philemon has just not given up, but he's kind of reserved himself to second place. And you get that. It's kind of, I've been outclassed. I get this. I've got stuff to learn in this sport. I'm going to come back a better person. Completely understand that. But as it hits the valley in a second, you get to see the number of spectators. And it's literally like a Tour de France stage. It's massively populated. And that's the part, for me, it's the part of the reason that the Kenyans are here. It's really, really interesting. Kilian this is his territory, and very, very, very technical. There's people on the course, but let's just have a look at the results. So the results, just 30 seconds, 45 seconds later, you got Kilian winning it in the fastest time that he's ever run, 2:25:34. And Philemon has had to go 2 minutes faster than his time the year before to get second place. And it's Kenya 2:34 with Run Together on team, which is really interesting, because these sponsors on Brooks Trail now, Hocker have been there for a while, Solomon have been there for a while. They are making this into a race because it is prize money, 2,000 Czech francs or whatever it is, Swiss francs, and 6,000 for the course record, 8,000 pounds essentially for the win and course record last weekend, plus what the sponsor's going to give you. It's a decent payday for, not necessarily for Kilian. Kilian is worth a decent chunk of change, but it's a lot of money for a Kenyan who would otherwise not be anywhere in road running. And I say that with, the most respect in the world. So last year, that's the results. Kenya 1, 2, 3. Kilian wasn't there. So 2 minutes slower Philemon had to do, but he's only 21 there. It's impressive. And I go to his results to see, where's this kid come from? Thailand, to see that. World Mountain Running last November, came second, which is impressive because it's a relatively strong field, but it's not like the commercial races. Can't find any results past 2022. If I go on the Wikipedia, the first result that I've got for him is 26th of June, 2022. So 2 years in the sport, and half marathon time I can find at sort of 66 minutes, which is very mediocre for a Kenyan guy. All due respect. So it's, I don't know whether that race is down to Kilian working it out that way because he likes the drama, but I don't think so when you're running the fastest time on a 31-kilometer course with 2,200 meters up and down. Fascinating weekend at Sierre-Zinal, and it brought to head a question that has been asked a lot in the last sort of 20, 30 years since Kenyans and that pocket of East Africa has dominated essentially road running, marathon running, but also a lot on track and field. The question has always been, when are they going to start dominating in the mountains? And when are they going to dominate in trail races? I think we saw a glimpse of that on the weekend, and I think what I've always thought from being around East African athletes and being around Kenyans, Ethiopians, is that they look at it a lot more. They look at the sport of running and what they're doing a lot more like a business than we do. They look at it like a profession. And for as long as we've known, there's been Italian and Spanish and other agents as well from around the world that have gone over to Kenya and put these guys in different races around the world, whether it's sort of races in Canada, America, the UK, Europe, to dominate in marathon running. And that's meant prize money. And so far, we've always been able to sort of follow the money and see where East African athletes are going to be. On the weekend, we saw Sierre-Zinal in Switzerland, a race that Kilian has dominated for a long time. I think he's got 10 wins. So it's 31 kilometers. It's extremely technical, from my perspective anyway. It's 2,200 meters up and down with 1,100 meters, like pretty much sheer drop, of which you've got to be very skilled. And Philemon, who was literally neck and neck right until the finish, a Kenyan athlete, has done well there before, he's won there, but he showed at the weekend that he was at least on par with Kilian, or just behind Kilian, which is mind-blowing if you think about it. I'm going to try to explain why. Kilian is a freak of nature. Born in the mountains, born in the Alps, in the Pyrenees, and since a young kid, just been up and down, whether it's mountaineering, whether it's climbing, whether it's hiking, whether it's running, whether it's ski mountaineering, just a freak of nature, raw talent, extremely big VO2 max, the most talented runner there has been for the last 100 years. You'd have to say that, and especially sort of, obviously, anything off-road. And what we saw is he had to run his fastest time that he's ever ran at that race, and run a PB and run a course record, and still only 2-3 seconds behind was Philemon, which for me is mind-blowing because it shows that the Kenyans are here, and they are there or thereabouts, they're already winning trail races, and we're going to see a dominance. And what are the reasons why? I think this. Now, if you look at the prize money for Sierre-Zinal, it's just 2,000 Swiss francs for the win, and then the course record is 6,000 francs. So that's, for Kilian, on payday, if you hit both of those, around £8,000 or $10,000, decent payday in trail running, but nothing compared to doing well at a city marathon. Like Boston, $150,000 for the winner, places like Chicago, around about $100,000. And there's other big marathons, even London is sort of $50,000, $60,000, so not a great deal of money. But on top of that will come the sponsorship money. And what Kenyans in that pocket of East Africa have always struggled with, and we see that on the track as well, and we kind of see the difference that Eliud Kipchoge has brought. And really, Eliud Kipchoge is just very, very calculated speaker, very kind of humble human being, and smiles a lot, which we love. Whereas athletes before have been criticized about this from East Africa. They win the race and they don't celebrate because essentially, like Roy Keane says, they've just done their job. And so there's nothing to celebrate. They're exhausted, they've got the prize money, and the agent's probably going to take between 50 and 65% of that, unless they've got to a point where they've got some clout behind them. If you look at the Kenyan salary, a typical Kenyan, and you can kind of look at different sources on this, but they're earning between $250 per month and $1,000 a month. So even if you look at Sierre-Zinal final, that's a pretty big payday if you're considering that it takes maybe an entire year to earn $4,000 or $6,000. It's a big difference. And if we kind of equate that in our terms, if you were to go to a race, a 31-kilometer race with 2,200 meters up and down, and you could win a year's salary or a year and a half salary, it's going to create a big buzz and it's going to attract big names. That's an interesting part of it. If we then look at standards in ultra running and trail running, we've got to be really honest with ourselves here, because when I got into running and then quickly spotted a little bit too old to be really good in a marathon, maybe I was unfair to myself then, but my niche became ultra running. And I spotted the 100K world record at 6 hours and 13 minutes and thought that it was a weak record. I think the previous record had been 6:18. Somebody had knocked 5 minutes off, it was then 6:13. I thought, it's 3:43 per kilometer. That's not a big jump from where I am now. And I was kind of running that for a marathon in 2012, and then thinking, okay, how long can I actually hold this pace for? If you're honest about it and you kind of admit that if a Kenyan was incentivized enough to run 100 kilometers as fast as they could, and they work in groups, what would a Kenyan run for 100 kilometers? Now, the current world record by Alexander, I don't want to butcher his second name, but Latvian, is 6:05. So that's 6 hours and 5 minutes. So it's already insanely good, and he's a talent and a force in himself. But what about if a Kenyan would do that? The closest I can get to comparison is this. Now, the world record for a marathon is 2 hours and 35 seconds, Kelvin Kiptum. And if you look at that Kenyan and that East African pocket, 2:05 is now pretty regular. And since 2017, where we saw super shoes introduced, and all of a sudden we're gaining massive amounts of time, 2:05 is a pretty regular marathon. It's not going to get you anywhere if you want to focus on road marathons. So what do those athletes do, and how do they monetize a career and make it a full-time gig for themselves to hopefully reach those next levels? If we look at London 2012, I always sort of remember this, there was 2 British athletes hit the qualifying standard. I think the qualifying standard was about 2:11. There was 500 athletes who hit the qualifying standard in Kenya alone. That's the difference. 2 British runners and 500 Kenyan runners who ran under 2:11. It might have been 2:12:30 or something close to that. But that gives you an idea, 250 times more strength and depth, and then pace, and then competition and training groups on a different level altogether. So if we look at the 50K, and if there was a big incentive put forward for a Kenyan or an East African to run a fast 50K, what's the current world record? Current world record set very, very recently, 2:38, 2 hours and 38 minutes by CJ Albertson in America. Now, he's a force, of course, yeah? But he's only a 2:10 marathon runner. And I say only, I mean, it's an incredible time. But what about if we send a 2:02 Kenyan marathon runner and ask them to run as fast as they possibly can for $100,000 reward, run a 50K, and they just have to run 7.8K further? What time are we going to hit? I think this tells a big picture of levels and standards within distance running. And if Kenya and East Africa really, really went at the ultra distances, you'd have to say that for a 2:02 marathon runner to get that right, to get the long run right, to get the training right towards 50K, to pass the marathon in 2:05, 2:06, he's going to be coming in at around about 10 minutes faster than the current world record, around about 2 hours 28. And for me, that's the interesting part, or another interesting part, because it's about the incentive, and it's about business. It's about who gets paid, whether it's worth it for race organizers to set up that, to incentivize, who are the sponsors behind it, how are those people able to train and be incentivized through sponsorships, through appearance fees, through prize money, through course records, through world records. You could quite easily make a big event out of that, in the same way that Ironman have done with the World Championships. I'll find myself not interested in swimming, but interested in cycling and running. But the way Ironman tells the story, and it's all about storytelling, is all of a sudden, I'm 4 o'clock in the morning in Spain, I'm waking up to watch live in Hawaii, people swimming caps bobbing up and down in the water for an hour or an hour and 10 minutes. Doesn't make sense, but I can't wait for them to get on the bike, and then I want to see who's really got it on the run. It's interesting because every 15 minutes, Ironman is smart enough to realize that running or cycling or swimming alone is not that interesting. And although we've just come out of the Olympic period and we can get really excited, Josh Kerr versus Ingebrigtsen, we've got major marathons going on, is Sifan Hassan going to be able to do the treble? It gets us excited for a short period of time, and then people forget about it for 3.5 years and then remember about it when we want medals again. That's exactly how we are in Britain, and I know it kind of works that way in the rest of the world. The thing that they do really well at Ironman is they're able to pre-record stories. Might be a Turkish athlete that is, you know, nobody's doing triathlon in Turkey, but as a Turkish athlete, all of a sudden he's going to do an Ironman. He's going to be the first person to compete in the World Championships. It might be somebody who lost a leg in a war, and they'll do an interview and then put it in every sort of 15 minutes. So you get emotionally attached to the people who you're watching on the TV.
might be the top 5, top 10, but it's not just the top 10. It's about other people and their journeys. And I think that's what we love about endurance. We love the pursuit. We love that it's accessible, that anybody can do it, whether it's getting on the bike or whether it's running or whether it's swimming. It's very easy for people to then sort of say, well, I'm here. This is how fast I can swim 25 meters. These guys are doing it like this quick. So it's very interesting and very easy for people to equate what's going on in front of them at the top level and then see what they can do. I think the same thing can happen with ultra running. And we kind of saw trail running, and we've seen it with the UTMB, which is, you know, taken over by Ironman. But they understand that we need better coverage, and so we need to see what's going out on there. We can't just have them at a checkpoint, and then 2 hours later we've seen them come through a checkpoint with a different camera. We've got to be following them on a trail, which the most impressive part about Sierre-Zinal, Sierre-Zinal on the weekend, was the cameraman chasing after Kilian and Philemon, holding a camera and kind of like the talent and skill that it takes to descend at those paces. 3 minutes per kilometer, 3:20 per kilometer, going downhill, severe gradients with a camera is really impressive. But UTMB and other races in the trail series and other ultra races have realized that if they can tell the stories and if they can follow the race, they have something. I think we can do better at that in sport because, you know, athletics is facing a crisis. I know we've just come out of the Olympics, but we're facing a crisis in the way that football is interesting because a lot of different things can happen at any moment. We saw Manchester City versus Manchester United at a weekend, 7-6 on penalties. After 90 minutes has passed, another 30 minutes, and then it's decided on one kick of the ball. If we look at UFC and how that's grown, because at any moment, despite, you know, the top dog versus the underdog, all of a sudden, a knockout punch is a knockout punch. It knocks anybody down. And so because it's that exciting and you can add characters and you can really pit people against each other, the sport has just blown up within 10 to 15 years. Athletics is lagging behind because we don't have those rivalries. And we need to know more about the athletes. And whether it's good or bad, I don't know. But typically, your athlete, especially longer distance athletes, are introverted. And that's obviously not as easy to get out on camera and get interesting stories. But what's your opinion? Did you watch the Olympics? Were you invested in just some of the races, or did you watch the whole thing? Did you see Sierre-Zinal on the weekend? Did you watch that kind of close race between Kilian and Philemon? What do you think about ultra running? Is there a way that we can tell stories through the running? And what do you think about Ironman? Is it too commercial, or are they just getting it right? It's a really fascinating topic.